Hi everyone, I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and I want to dye some yarn in a pan that I just finished using for a project. So I am going to quickly wipe this down because we got a little bit of pink dye left on the edge, and ideally we won't end up with pink in the colorway I have planned for today. I mean, if an oops happens, an oops happens, and I don't feel like transitioning to a whole other dye bath. We'll do one more wipe. But this is how sometimes I transition. And this could be something that you do for, say, a leave no dye behind maybe, or really just on a day when you want to dye a lot of yarn and you want to use the same pan over and over. If there's a lot of color left, you might then need to retransition things, but I think we're pretty good today. Now, this dye bath originally started with 8 cups of water and 6 or 7 tablespoons of white vinegar. So we should have plenty of acid in here, even though the volume is greatly reduced. Before we jump in, I want to give a huge shout out and thank you to today's lab partner, Cindy. Cindy, thank you so much for being my lab partner for today's episode of Dyepot Weekly. I really hope that you're going to enjoy this video and your yarn. It's funny, I'm not even talking about the technique or anything that I'm planning to do today. I'm just going straight in. And here is some of our yarn that I've pre-soaked. This is some Stroll fingering weight yarn. And as I'm adding it in, we've got 300 grams of this yarn. I'm trying to add it in so that way it's not like an O. We've got part of the yarn, 1/2 of the yarn on the bottom, 1/2 on the top. And we'll be moving the yarn multiple times throughout the process. So instead of having the yarn down like this, we have those 2 sides, one on top of the other. So that way we can access more or less half of the skein pretty well from the beginning. Now, the heat is still on. Be careful when you put your hands into a warm dye bath. It's not that hot, it's more warm. I do want to add some more liquid though. Now, the more water we have in the pan, the more the colors we add have the opportunity to spread. The less water, the less spread. And you can see that a little bit here because the yarn was at the surface before. And now, with more water, I think I added around 4 more cups of water, we still have a lot of yarn at the surface. So the yarn is less compact. With a lower volume of water, the yarn is just going to kind of settle down a little more versus being a little more floaty, where we can get a little bit more spread of our colors that I'm about to go show you. But for now, I'm going to turn up the heat, and I guess we're going to wait around 15 minutes. That's probably how long it'll take for things to heat up. Oh, and Knit Pick Stroll is 75% superwash merino wool, 25% nylon. So what technique am I doing today? Scribble dyeing. This is what I call a technique where I take dyes in squeeze bottles usually and use that and sort of do random designs, maybe sometimes hearts or stars. I'm feeling sort of random squiggles today. And it's just a way to add the color onto the yarn that is whimsical and fun, and it's a technique that I really love. And depending on the colors you use, you can end up with things that end up feeling softer than you might expect in the end. But we'll get there. The 3 colors that I'm planning on using today are Dharma Acid Dyes Radioactive, Spearmint Breeze, and then Fluorescent Lemon. Even though I know that says bright aqua, clearly this is not bright aqua. Now, fluorescent lemon, the fluorescent lemon I mixed up today with 1/2 gram of dye in this whole bottle. So we have a little over 1/4 gram of this color left. Each of these other bottles hold 500 milliliters. I would say we probably have 50 to 75 milliliters of radioactive. So I would say between 1/2 gram and a whole gram of dye here, and we probably have maybe around 100 milliliters of this 1% stock solution, so around 1 gram of dye. So by my estimation here, we could use up all of this dye on the yarn, and then we'd have under 3 grams of dye on 300 grams of yarn. But I don't think we're gonna get close to using it all up because I have a feeling that I'm gonna like where we are and we're still gonna have a ton of liquid left. But we'll see. You never know. You never know. So I'm gonna go ahead and let things finish heating up, and then we'll come back and hope that these two squeeze bottles aren't clogged. This is a little hotter than I need things, so I'm gonna reduce the heat to low and bring over first our fluorescent yellow. And when I said Scribble, I really meant Scribble. I find that the act of doing these circles and things gives a really nice evenness to the way I'm adding the dyes. If I'm doing lines and going back and forth, I squeeze harder when I change directions. But when I'm sort of going in a circular motion, then I'm able to layer the color in a much more consistent way. And I think it gives things that are more random feeling too. Now, there are some places where maybe I go like this direction, and that might give a larger patch of color, but there's also going to be some smaller patches of color. And so it's going to be really, really pretty. Okay. Now the tip of my Spearmint Breeze is not as thick, and this is a color that likely will strike a little bit faster. But you can see why I might enjoy to do hearts and things. Now, I made it all the way to the edge on this side. I did not over here, so I'm adding a little bit more. It's very free-flowing, very fun, and we have so much dye left. This can be a nice way to leave no dye behind as I come in with the radioactive. Radioactive right now looks a little bit like an acid green color. It does sort of become more of a neon green as you add it and let things layer and sit. Okay, so we have our three colors right now. This is very, very green. And if we go a little bit closer, you can see how things have layered. There's crisscrosses. We're gonna have combinations of the colors. The Spearmint Breeze is a lot more blue in some areas versus where it's layered with the yellow. And the colors also may not just sit on the surface of the yarn as we see here. They may strike pretty quickly or they may spread more. In particular, the radioactive is a color that breaks. So when we flip the yarn, we could see some different colors. But what I'm gonna do is set a timer for 5 minutes, leaving the camera exactly right here. So then we can see if things have spread and softened at all in that short amount of time. I almost forgot I was keeping the camera steady. Things have stayed put pretty well. But again, editing Rebecca may notice something different. Okay, as I flip the yarn, this brings me to something that I bring up from time to time, but oh my gosh, look how cool that looks. Like when the yarn shifts and the colors spread out, that's just so fun. This brings me to what makes a project a leave no dye behind project versus one that isn't. Clearly here today I'm using a leftover dye bath. Some of these are dyes that I mixed for another project. So on one hand, you could call this leave no dye behind. But this is probably an episode of Dyepot Weekly. And so, Rebecca, what makes the difference? Well, sometimes it's my mood. A lot of times it's my mood that could make something, me call something Dyepot Weekly versus leave no dye behind. And sometimes it has to do with the mindset and the amount of planning that goes into a project. For example, today I decided, because I had done some scribble dyeing, that I wanted to do some more, and I went and I picked out colors to do it. Now technically, these are all acid dye stocks that I had mixed for other projects. So that makes them leftovers. I don't think I make dye stocks for the sake of having dye stocks made very often anymore. Because if I want liquid dyes for something specific, I prefer to mix them fresh. So anything I'm doing with my liquid dyes that are ones that I have made up already, you could call a leave no dye behind as well, but it's also just the mindset. Scribble dyeing is a great way to use up leftover dyes. I think I've used up maybe around half of the dye that I have so far. I'm going to set a timer for another, I don't remember if I did 5, I think I did 5 minutes last time. We'll do 5 minutes again. But it's all about the mindset. It's saying I want to layer these 3 colors or these 8 colors together, and you could mix up the dyes fresh for the project or decide and pick your colors based on what you have left over. But a lot of times the videos that I then call a leave no dye behind are really those leftovers I have at the end of a day of dyeing. And I'm like, okay, I need to use this up because maybe I don't have these in stock containers. And so if I don't use it up, they're gonna spill or go to waste in some kind of way. So anyway, ultimately it's my mood. But there's only 3.5 minutes left on the timer, so I'll see you soon. We're back. You know, from time to time, I feel like I go through things that I've definitely talked about before, but I've also, it's important for me to remember, which I don't always remember, is that not everyone has watched all 1,000, whatever, I have a lot. Not everybody has watched all of my videos, which is absolutely fine. I don't expect anyone to watch all of them. I'm assuming I'm the only person alive who has watched all of the different ChemKnits videos that are out there. But that's why it's like, there's no stupid questions. It's always okay to ask questions or wonder, and see, like, if something isn't clear, please ask, because, you know, I think that, not that I even remember everything that I've said or haven't said over the years, but there may be times where I might forget what I've said in a particular video versus other videos. And I have a feeling that that happens more than I'd like to give credit for. So one thing that's kind of cool, and oh yes, we've almost used up all that yellow. That was a hope for today, was to use up that yellow. And in fact, given that things are spreading, and a tiny, tiny bit in a cup, we're using that up too. I was gonna say, because I mean, we can keep layering and layering the colors, and the thing that happens, it's kind of fun, is that things start, sometimes they can have a bit of a speckly feel, but sometimes they can almost get a bit of a watercolory feel, depending on how much water you have here in the container and how much the colors are spreading when you add them. I mean, over here, and I'll zoom that in after I've added our radioactive, I'm not adding quite as much in each layer now. And when I flip the yarn again in 5 minutes, I'm going to be looking for areas of yarn that don't have as much color. But you can see in here that we've got some little dots. Those are like big speckles because the blue pigments in radioactive strike first. And sometimes with the squeeze bottle, rather than getting a continuous stream of color, and I'm pointing to one that's not on camera, because sometimes instead of getting a continuous stream of color, we get a lot of little drips, which is fun and fine. But some of the colors layer more and we'll get something that's going to feel kind of watercolory, but also potentially a little bit speckly. So anyway, I will see you in a moment. This is so green and spring-like. It is making me so happy. And we still have some whites left. What I'm feeling very little of, to be honest, is the yellow. Because all those other blues in here has sort of joined it. But it's all good. It's all good. And, aha, we got a big section that had white. But again, if we have a big section of white, who cares? It's not that big a deal. But I'm bringing these last little drops of yellow into those areas. And I'm still going to have a little bit of both of the greens left over. And that is okay. But here you can see how I'm getting, versus a line, more of those like little drip, 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 drips. We're leaning into it. I could transfer the dyes to another bottle, but I don't want to. I like what's happening. All right. I think we're probably pretty good, but I'll check in after 5 minutes. You don't really need to wait 5 minutes each time. I could flip and move the yarn right away. What it would do, and it depends on the pigments that you're using, but if I were to flip right away, more of the color would spread. So some of the color would probably stay put, but some of the color, if I were to lift and flip immediately, would spread out and give us more of a background color. And our background color is very pastel now. Like right here, this is a light green. That is not a white anymore. Whereas maybe up here, we do have a little bit of white. So we are absolutely seeing some spread. It's just we would get even more spread and even more blending of the colors if I were to flip right away. Ultimately, it's also another matter of preference, but again, I'll see you soon. You know what this reminds me of? Because I feel like a lot of the colors are the same. As I come in 4 more cups of water. This reminds me of the variegated section of a self-striping yarn that I did earlier this year. Where's that zip tie? See, and notice this is something else that I don't think I talk about a lot. I add these zip ties onto the yarn, and it makes it really handy for lifting it and preventing tangles. It's a really great way to prevent tangles. But anyway, this looks like some yarn that I dyed earlier this year in a way that I hadn't considered, even though I didn't use the blue and whatnot. But, and if you're curious, this is how much I have left of these colors. I used most of the radioactive, maybe half of the spearmint breeze. But I'll save those for another project another day. And now I'm going to heat everything in here for 25 minutes. So that way we've had 30 minutes from the last time I added dye. Honestly, since all the color is in the yarn, I don't know if this extra time really is necessary, but I always will heat my yarn for 30 minutes from the last time I added dye, just as a, I guess like a precaution. And so it works. Sometimes you may want to change your rules of thumb, but this is one that makes me feel comfortable, and so that's why I stick with it. But anyway, I'll see you in 24.5 minutes. Now, there could be one reason, and I don't know if the background is more green now than it was before. I honestly can't tell. But there could be one reason to remove things from the dye bath sooner. There are some colors that bleed in hot water, and greens tend to be a culprit of that. So one thing that you could do or may choose to do after scribble dyeing, if you don't want the colors to bleed and spread, which I didn't mind if they did, but I feel like we have a lot more of a neon green base color. And maybe we had that all along, but maybe it's a little bit more. One thing that you can do is once you're satisfied with the color coverage, but then you want to apply more heat, you can remove the yarn from the dye bath, add it to a steamer basket to steam set, because then with less water, the dyes aren't really going to spread. But anyway, I'm going to set this aside to cool completely so we can wash it. We're looking very, very green. And I'm going to turn off the heat here. There is a tinge of like yellow here in the pan, which is one of the hypothesis of things spreading, but it doesn't matter. Once our yarn is completely cool, then we can go ahead and wash it. Let's wash our yarn. And I always recommend washing on cold, but even though it's late March, the cold water is way too cold. And here I am rinsing off the pan. Acid on these pans can cause the aluminum to dissolve eventually, so I always try to rinse that off. And I added some clear dish soap just because it has no color to it. All right. Please, oh please, nothing in the water. Yes! Since there was a little color in the dye pot, I was a little bit nervous, but I don't see anything, so this is a win. Oh gosh. You know I'm in a mood when I start singing on camera and I don't even refilm the clip. So I'm leaving that in there because it's not a recognizable tune, and so therefore no one can copyright claim me. which copyright claims are not the reason why I don't sing on camera. That's because I don't want anyone's ears to bleed. But anyway, oh, this colorway is so fun. I think Ryder's gonna really want it. But anyway, I'm gonna put it through my spin dryer and hang it up to dry so we can see the finished yarn. Here is our finished yarn, and we're looking extraordinarily green right now. I mean, we did have a lot of green in there, but there are a few, like I see one right here. Let's flip it. Not very many hints of the yellow. I think that we got enough spread of our greens. Okay, maybe a tiny bit right there, but I'm not really feeling that neon yellow much anymore. Now, there are elements of the brightness from the yellow. Even though it is leaning more green, you can see that in there. But it's not ever quite as sharp as our, what was it, Spearmint Breeze? It was either Spearmint Breeze or Bright Aqua. I think Spearmint. And Radioactive gives us those more deeper green, like apple green kind of speckles. And that's because there's pigments in each of those colors that strike faster than our fluorescent yellow would strike. And I think both of them may break a little bit. Certainly Radioactive breaks. But I think that it just gives a little bit of fun, soft speckle effect to the overall yarn. And of course, things are very fluorescent. Oh man, I have to move this pretty far back. But they're, with the exception of I guess those more speckle things, we've got a lot of fluorescence in here, and actually now you can really see a little bit more of the placement of some of the yellow in those small patches, especially on that middle skein. But we do have a lot of fluorescence all over. Looking at the yarn from far away, you see a lot of the spread, but these subtle color shifts really come more into play when you look at the yarn close up, and you can see, yes, some speckles, but also some of these bigger areas from where we added the color and that dimension we have in here. Now, if you want the colors to spread less, use less water in your dye bath. If you want them to spread more, have more water. But the amount of acid you have in there can also be important, because if you want colors to strike slower, have less acid, faster, more acid. And then of course the actual pigments you're using do make a difference as well. For example, that fluorescent lemon spreads a lot more. It does not strike as fast. Radioactive has a pigment in there that does strike faster. And honestly, I don't know, even if I had no vinegar or anything in there, we might have seen some of those speckles with the radioactive. That bluer pigment, the greener pigment in there tends to strike pretty quickly. Cindy, thank you so much for being my lab partner for today's episode of Dyepot Weekly. I really hope you're gonna love the yarn. And I think it's so fun, watercolory with a few areas that are a little more speckled. Oh, we're blown out, but I adore it, and I hope you love it too. If you want to learn more about how you can get shout outs in an episode of Dyepot Weekly, like Cindy, there are a few ways you can do that. You can sign up to become a lab partner or a last minute lab partner through the ChemKnits Creations Etsy shop. The difference between the two listings is that as a last minute lab partner, I've already started filming the video, and then I'll film some shout outs for you to incorporate into the video. But you get to pick from a list of projects and see some hints on the techniques and the colors. With the other lab partner listing, you pick a yarn base, tell me a few colors to avoid, and then I'll start dyeing the yarn to create the video. If you have any questions about this or need clarification, please reach out to me through direct message in the ChemKnits Creations Etsy shop. The lab partner listing may be sold out right now, but if you're interested, again, message me and I can add you to a waiting list to let you know once I restock those. But anyway, Cindy, thank you again for being my lab partner today. The three colors we started with today are sort of related in that we have like a yellow green, and then another like yellowish green. But you can play around with this with colors that aren't so close together on the color wheel. However, it is a great technique to give you a little bit of dimension to your yarn while still having the palette overall feel like, from far away, this color looks like, okay, this is a bright neon green. But then when you look closer, you see a lot more of the little dimension that we have in here. And so with whatever color you do this, it's using colors that are even close together. It's a nice way to get a little bit of dimension in your project. Or you can go for colors that have a lot bigger difference between them and get some really fun, pretty yarn. So I really hope that you enjoy this. I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and please subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new video. And if you love this yarn that I dyed, go and check out the listings in the ChemKnits Creations Etsy shop. This yarn may or may not still be in my shop, but my shop is filled with hand-dyed yarn that's been featured in my videos, and it's a great way to help support everything over here on the channel. The perfect win-win-win. Thank you so much for watching.